It's October 2024, and I've headed to the heart of 18th century Midlands Enlightenment and birthplace of both the modern dictionary and the theory of evolution, the cathedral city of Lichfield. Located 18 miles southeast of the Staffordshire county town of Stafford and bordered by the high grounds of Cannock Chase to the west and the valleys of the Trent and Tame to the east, the city of Lichfield sits on a seam of Mercian red sandstone from which many of the city's oldest buildings have been constructed. The area in and around Lichfield has been inhabited since the Mesolithic era, and just 2.2 miles southwest of Lichfield is a point where Icknield and Watling Street, two of the major Roman roads of Britain, cross, with Icknield Street linking what is today Gloucestershire with South Yorkshire, whilst Watling Street was the main route from the English Channel ports through to the Welsh border via Londinium. The first mention of Lichfield itself is in the works of the Venerable Bede, who mentioned the town as being the site where St Chad fixed the episcopal see for the Mercians in 669, and this is generally given as the starting date of Lichfield for its history. The first Christian king of Mercia donated the land at Lichfield for St Chad to build a monastery close to the then seat of the Mercian kings in Tamworth. Without city walls, Lichfield was attacked during the 9th century by Danish Vikings, with the bishops moving the episcopal see to Chester in 1075. At the time the Domesday Book survey reached Staffordshire in 1086, Lichfield was listed as a small village, with the lord of the manor being the Bishop of Chester, a situation that remained up until the reign of Edward VI in the middle of the 16th century. The city gained a market charter from King Stephen in 1153, and ever since then weekly markets have been held in the market square. Along with numerous churches and the cathedral, the city was also home to a Franciscan friary, which was established around 1237, with the friars dedicating their work to caring for the poor and sick. Of course, that didn't protect the friars from the itchy fingers of Henry VIII, who helped himself to the wealth and properties of all the monasteries of England, with the bulk of the friary in Lichfield being demolished almost as soon as the land was sold in 1538. Just the bishop's lodgings survived, later incorporated into the building of a school on the site. The layout of the remainder of the ruins was uncovered in 1933 and was listed as a scheduled ancient monument to protect it from future development. Henry VIII's policies had a dramatic effect on the city, with the Reformation bringing about the end of pilgrim traffic to the cathedral following the destruction of St Chad's shrine in 1538. With the economy in decline, the last thing it needed was to lose over a third of its population to an outbreak of the plague in 1593. To add to its gruesome reputation, Lichfield was the last place in England where public burning at the stake for heresy took place, with Edward Whiteman from Burton-upon-Trent being executed in the marketplace on the 11th of April 1612 for promoting himself as the divine paraclete and saviour of the world. During the English Civil War, the city found itself divided, with the cathedral authority supporting the king, with the general population siding with Parliament. The churchmen retreated into the fortified close in 1643. Surrounded by a high wall and moats, the cathedral area would have more resembled a castle than a religious institution, and proved to be an important asset to hold, with its changing hands on 3 occasions, with the parliamentarians taking it from the royalists, only to have it retaken within the year by Prince Rupert of the Rhine, before finally being taken by the parliamentarian forces following the collapse of the royalist cause in 1646. Whilst the fortifications may have made it look like a castle, it was built like a cathedral and consequently suffered significant damage, to such an extent that serious consideration was given to pulling the cathedral down altogether, with the site laying empty throughout the years of the Commonwealth. Following the restoration of the monarchy, the decision was taken to restore the cathedral, with works being overseen by Bishop Hackett and funded by generous donations from the new King Charles II. In the following years, the city started to develop as a key coaching town on the busy route between London and Chester, quickly turning it into the most prosperous town in the county. The city became a centre of the Midlands Enlightenment, with the likes of Samuel Johnson, David Garrick, Erasmus Darwin and Anna Seward creating, in Johnson's words, a city of philosophers, with many of them decades, if not centuries, ahead in their thinking, in particular over slavery and education for all. From the late 18th century into the early 19th century, much of the medieval city was rebuilt into a red brick Georgian city. With the arrival of the railways and the rapid decline of the coaching routes, the city lost out to nearby Birmingham, and consequently growth of the city almost stopped, leaving it with the picturesque city centre that it has today. Lichfield Cathedral, or the Cathedral Church for Virgin Mary and St Chad, is the third or arguably the fourth such building on this site, depending on whether you consider the near total rebuild, albeit the same design following the Civil War destruction, a new building. With the Diocese of Mercia being created in 656, work was soon started on a cathedral, likely made from timber, with the first cathedral on the site being consecrated in 700. The fifth bishop was Chad of Mercia, who was bishop from 669 to 672 and was already being referred to as a saint shortly after his death. His relics were interred in the cathedral, making it a site of pilgrimage up until the English Reformation in 1538. At some time around the Norman invasion, that original cathedral was pulled down to make way for a stone cathedral, of which there are only a handful of traces in the lines of the roofs. Starting around 1200 and continuing on for around 120 years, works were undertaken on a new Gothic-style cathedral constructed from the local Mercian red sandstone, all locally quarried. It's likely that construction would have taken place around the existing cathedral, with the older building being pulled down in stages as elements of the new cathedral were completed. The cathedral is unique in the country in having 3 spires, with the central tower spire being added over 100 years after the original tower. Whilst it's a very pretty stone, the Mercian red sandstone is a very soft rock, and this has consequently led to problems throughout the life of the cathedral, including the ease with which parts of it were destroyed during the English Civil War. Following the restoration of the monarchy, the cathedral was rebuilt over a period of 10 years, starting in the 1660s, under the supervision of Bishop Hackett, but the full restoration of the cathedral to repair all the Civil War damage wasn't completed until the 19th century. Almost every century major repairs have had to be carried out, including replacing most of the stone vaulting in the nave with plaster moulded details as the walls were being bowed out under the weight of the roof. Not all the restoration works carried out have been of a high standard. At one point, all of the statues from the west front were removed and the stonework covered with Roman cement. It wasn't until the Victorian era that a restoration back to its medieval look was carried out under the direction of George Gilbert Scott, who restored back new versions of all the statues to the front of the building. Following the Reformation, the relics of St Chad were taken from the cathedral and eventually found their way to St Chad's Cathedral in Birmingham. In 2 separate services on the 7th and 8th of November 2022, the relics of the saint were brought home to Lichfield. Restarting in July 2024, after having to be suspended for a number of years because of yet more repair works on them, the cathedral relaunched tours of the towers and roof of the cathedral, which allows you to ascend up first to the northwestern tower, to the base of its spire, and then out onto the ledge of the roof to walk along the top of the nave towards the main tower of the cathedral. From here, it's back into the roof space for nave to take in the sheer amount of timber required for just this small section of the cathedral.
Down here, we don't want you to fall through the ceiling. Might not be a very good idea.
And then into the tower room, located about halfway up the tower. Before a final ascent up to the base of the main spire of the cathedral, and then being able to take in the views from the balconies of the tower out over the city and the wider countryside. before a final descent back down through the roof space of the south transept, and the only place where you can see its rose window from within the cathedral. Just behind the cathedral, and originally part of the property of the bishop, is Stowe Pool. The pool was originally created around the 11th century when a dam and mill were constructed across the Leamansley Brook close to St Chad's Church, with the mill being under the ownership of the Bishop of Lichfield, being an important part of the cathedral's income from the city up until its ownership passed from the bishop to the city in the 16th century. The mill was rebuilt many times over its life. In its final form, before its demolition in 1856, the mill consisted of 3 water wheels and an adjoining smithy. From the 13th century onwards, the pool was also an important fishery. However, by the 19th century, the slow-flowing nature of the streams that fed the pool caused it to silt up, with the western end, closest to cathedral, becoming a bog. As so often with industrialising Britain, the pool and stream were used as convenient sewer, both for human waste as well as a runoff from local tanneries. In the 1840s, the situation was so dire that proposals were brought forward to fill in what was now a major health hazard. In 1853, the South Staffordshire Waterworks Company was founded to make use of Lichfield's water resources to supply the Black Country. As part of the works, the mill was demolished, the waters dredged to remove the silt, and then an embankment was built around the pool to raise the water level up to its current size and converting it from a stinking cesspit into a clean water reservoir. A promenade was built on top to allow people to walk around the reservoir. With changing needs, the reservoir was taken out of commission in 1968 and handed back to the city of Lichfield, who turned it back into a public pool, including stocking it with fish for local anglers. Today, from the banks of the pool, you can get some of the best views of the cathedral and its spires. From behind the cathedral to in front of it, and in one of the many houses that surround the close, you find the home of Erasmus Darwin, part of the Midlands Enlightenment and a man ahead of his time. Born in 1731 in Elston near Newark-on-Trent, Erasmus became a highly respected physician after he settled in Lichfield in 1757. But he was also a natural philosopher, physiologist, inventor, poet, and a vehement advocate for the abolition of the slave trade and for the education of women, stands which led to him being sidelined in late 18th century Britain, and part of the reason his name isn't so well known. He helped to found multiple intellectual societies in Lichfield that attracted some of the greatest minds of the time, including local-born lad Samuel Johnson, writer of the first full English dictionary. His poetry was admired by Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley and Byron, amongst others, and in one poem written in 1789, he posited the concept of evolution, a full 70 years before his grandson, Charles Darwin, published his On the Origin of Species. Erasmus married twice, with Charles being a grandson from his first marriage, and from his second marriage, another grandson was scientist and polymath Francis Galton. Located in a prime position on the edge of the market square is the bookbinder's workshop and showroom of Michael Johnson. In the family home above the shop on the 18th of September 1709, Sarah Johnson gave birth to her first of 2 children, Samuel Johnson. Despite early illness, including contracting scrofula, Samuel would go on to show signs of great intelligence even when young. Samuel would excel at school in Lichfield before attending Pembroke College, Oxford, until the family's worsening finances forced him to leave, moving back to Lichfield to help his parents in their business. Much like that other Midlands literary genius Shakespeare, Johnson's father was a skilled tradesman, but a pretty lousy businessman, and also like John Shakespeare, got fined for dumping muck outside his premises. For a short period of time, Samuel ran a school with his wife, during which time he taught David Garrick, who would later go on to become one of England's greatest ever actors. In 1737, Johnson, along with Garrick, left Lichfield and headed for London to seek both their fortunes. In 1746, after working as a writer and translator, Johnson was approached by a group of publishers with the idea to create an authoritative dictionary of the English language. Johnson boasted that he could complete it in 3 years, though the project eventually took 8. Still a pretty impressive achievement, given it had taken 40 scholars over 40 years to produce the same for the Académie Française. Whilst it wasn't the first English dictionary, it was the first to illustrate the meaning of words using quotations, meaning the final book stretched to 2 massive volumes and retailed for £4 10 shillings, around £350 in modern prices. In part from the fame garnered from writing the dictionary, as well as from his other literary works, Johnson became a regular on the dinner party and society scene, and during this time he was awarded an honorary doctorate from Oxford University, after which he would simply become known as Dr. Johnson. Johnson died in London on the 13th of December 1784, having helped shape the English language in a way only comparable to William Shakespeare 2 centuries earlier. 2 men, both called Edward, who had very different impacts in the 20th century, are honoured in the town's Beacon Park, a large public park created in 1859 with a formal museum gardens close to the cathedral, giving way to open parkland stretching away to the west and north. Within the museum gardens are statues to King Edward VII, King of England from 1901 to 1910, who, despite his playboy reputation, managed to move Britain away from the Victorian era into the modern constitutional Britain that exists today. At the back of the garden is an Edward who died just 2 years later in 1912. Unlike Edward VII, Edward John Smith didn't die in a grand palace. Instead he, as his profession demanded, died on the bridge of his ship, the RMS Titanic, as it sunk beneath the icy waves of the North Atlantic. Reckless individual who was seeking fame and pushed his ship too hard, or the ultimate victim of an overbearing White Star Line who wanted the fame of their unsinkable ship making the fastest crossing of the Atlantic, it's impossible to ever know. But Edward was born in Hanley, now modern-day Stoke-on-Trent, and so as a Staffordshire man, his statue was erected in the centre of the diocese. 2 miles southwest of the city, and nearly 2,000 years back in time, you reach the settlement of Letocetum. Today, the site has an identity crisis, being both English heritage wall Roman site and the National Trust's Letocetum. An important military staging post at the junction of Watling and Icknield Streets, the fortress was first established in 50 CE as a key part of supplying the invading Roman forces as they conquered the island. Over the following years, the original fort developed into a significant settlement, housing both military and a growing civilian population. By around 130 CE, the site had lost most of its original military significance and instead had become a full civilian settlement. It's around this time that the 2 most visible parts of the surviving settlement were constructed, the bathhouse and the mansio, the latter being an official stopping place on a Roman road maintained by the central government for the use of officials or those on official business whilst travelling. Think of it as a Romanic co-working space and lodging house, a liberamus et post domen forte. The bathhouse and mansio were both rebuilt multiple times between the original arrival of the Roman army and the move into a civilian settlement, and it's believed the ruins that are visible are the third versions of both structures. Towards the end of the 3rd century, it appears a major fire destroyed both the baths and the mansio, and shortly afterwards very solid defences were built around the rest of the settlement. It's not known why they were abandoned, but archaeological evidence from across Britain shows other mansios being abandoned around this time as well, so it could indicate either a financial crisis or just a reorganisation of how the island was being managed. The defences around the rest of the site were likely built because of the general uprising of the nearby Welsh tribes, the Ordovices and the Siluras. Whilst revolt was soon quelled, the defences remained, and all archaeological remains from the 4th century have been discovered only inside the walls. The last coin found at Letocetum was dated to 381 CE, with the Roman administration collapsing just 23 years later, with Rome's withdrawal from the island in 404. It's likely that Letocetum continued to be occupied after the withdrawal of Rome, but was abandoned around the time Lichfield started to develop, with the placing of the seat of the bishop in the town. Lichfield has 2 stations, Lichfield City on the Birmingham Cross City suburban rail network, with half-hourly services to Birmingham New Street taking around 40 minutes, and the opposite direction to Lichfield Trent Valley 2 minutes up the line and located on the West Coast Main Line. Lichfield Trent Valley has hourly London North Western services south to London in just under 2 hours and north to Stafford and Crewe. Infrequent peak hour only Avanti West Coast trains on the Euston to Chester and North Wales services stop at Lichfield Trent Valley heading to London in the morning and towards Chester in the evenings.